Welcome to Midlife Matters. I'm Marie, and each week I'm joined by my friends Julie and Mindy to talk about all the topics keeping women in the middle years up at night. Today we're talking about traveling to London. Join us as Julie shares lots of tips on how to prepare, what to see and do, and ways to make the most of your trip, whether it's your first time or your fifth. Let's get started. Listeners, today we're talking about traveling to London. Julie just returned from her fifth trip to London, and she's ready to share all her favorite places to visit and travel tips. So whether you're wanting to plan your first trip or your fifth trip, this episode has something for you. So Julie, if someone is just very new and they're just thinking, hey, I'd like to go to London, what do you recommend on your first trip? Because I feel like that's different than subsequent trips. So let's start out with, I've never been, what do I do?
Well, I'll say on my first trip, I was just a day there that we had a layover, like we flew into London and then we were going to take the Channel to Paris. So we had a whole day to sightsee. So that was my first experience. And it was, of course, not enough time, but I knew then I must come back here.
Okay.
There's just so much to see. So I would say, like, on your first trip, don't feel bad like, oh, I'm doing touristy stuff, because you want to see the main attractions, and then the more and more you go there, you're going to want to kind of dive deeper and discover like hidden gems. But I think your first trip, you probably should see the main attractions, which for me, I mean, you always have to talk about museums when you visit a large city like London. I mean, London has over 250 museums. I myself get a little saturated pretty quickly with a museum, so I have to take them in small bits, and we've only done 2 or 3. So there's a lot more, to do. But I'd probably recommend starting off with the British Museum, and it's probably as big as the Louvre. So you would want to research it and say, okay, there's 4 things in there I want to see. And that's what we did, because we had our whole family there. There were 7 of us, and we all just looked at the map, picked a few things we wanted to see. We all went our separate ways and saw the 4 or 5 things that we could see, because you could literally spend weeks in there, and never see it. So you just have to kind of pick. I mean, they have the Rosetta Stone. They have a whole room of Egyptian mummies. They have the Parthenon sculptures. They have a bust of Ramses the Great from 1200 BC. They have an Easter Island statue. They have the Gates of Nineveh. I mean, it's just an amazing collection. So I would say, pick a museum. There's a natural history museum. There's the Victoria and Albert Museum. There's portrait galleries, art galleries. And then kind of smaller ones that we discovered along the way were like the Churchill War Rooms, or the Charles Dickens Museum, or the Sherlock Holmes Museum. It's definitely worth visiting a museum. And then, Westminster Abbey. This is an architectural masterpiece, 1,000 years of history. It's a coronation church. Royal weddings take place there. It's a burial site for like over 3,000 significant British, like people that are significant in Britain's history. But one neat way to see that, if you didn't want to pay to tour it, which I think you should, you can go, because it's a real church. You can go to Evensong, which is just a song service that happens every night, I think, of the week, every weeknight at 5:00. And you can just go and participate without paying anything, because you're going to church. And you can do that in a lot of churches in England. And that's just a neat way to be in and kind of see what they do. I would say the Tower of London is another thing you should probably see your first time. It's not a tower. It's a castle, fortress, a prison, but it holds the crown jewels. Did you see that, Marie? Did you go to the crown jewels?
Yeah, I mean, we went to every part of everything, so I'm sure we did. But after all the things you see in one week, your mind is like,
yeah, mush.
I know, it really is. It's like we just, every time we would talk with a couple that was from the UK, we would say, how do you teach your kids all this history? We only have 300 years to teach
Right.
of US history, and they have thousands. Like, I don't know how you ever get it in.
Right.
But yeah, because that castle dates back to 1066. So that it just goes back a long way. Everybody wants to see Buckingham Palace. I've never gone inside. Maria, you said you did.
It was great. Yeah.
Yeah. My favorite is Kensington Palace, and that is the birthplace of Queen Victoria. And I just like the history there, and it's beautiful. I would say St. Paul's Cathedral. You can tour it, or once again, we went to Evensong and just went to a church service there.
Mm-hmm.
There's Big Ben and Parliament, and that would
Mm-hmm.
certainly keep you busy for 3 or 4 days. If you wanted to leave London, you could visit Windsor Castle. It's just a little to the west of London, and we did choose to do that on our big trip, family trip there. And somebody advised us to, if you wanted to see the changing of the guard, to do it there because it just wasn't as crowded. Like you can get caught in a massive crowd at Buckingham Palace to see the changing of the guard.
Yeah, and I would recommend the live guides wherever you can. Like we went on a Verger tour at Westminster Abbey, and it was a small group. It was very reasonable. You just buy your ticket like when you get there. It was so interesting. I mean, the audio tours are great, but I felt like this was another level, and you even got to go in things that the people listening to the audio tour didn't get to go in. And then the Tower of London, they have great tour guides there that are included in your purchase price. We went on a tour with somebody. These are just volunteers that will tour you around St. Paul's Cathedral. And, all these things, when I first think about them, I think, how interesting can they be? A live tour guide really brings it to life, really gets you interested in what you're seeing. I mean, you are fascinated by it. It's so interesting.
Yeah. Well, that's funny because when I just returned from London and I went with 2 other couples and my son went with us, and they were already there on a mission trip, and then we're going to meet me in London. And she wanted to see some things outside of London, like Bath and Dover and Oxford. And I said, well, what about London? And she goes, yeah, there's really nothing in London I care to see. And I kind of took her at her word, and I really shouldn't have, because when we got there and I'm planning a kind of a spontaneous day trip out to something, she was like, oh no, I got to stay here. She goes, I haven't seen anything in London. And she suddenly cared deeply about seeing all of this. Like she went to Westminster Abbey and the Tower of London while I went somewhere else. But I think it pays to do a little research before you go, even if you're not researching how you're going to do your trip. Like maybe you're going to buy an itinerary or have a travel agent plan it, at least know what's there. Because you will want to see this stuff. And what you said about the guides is so true. And I wanted to give a plug for, it's called London Walks. And one of John's partners in medicine gave him this recommendation. This man had traveled the entire world. And he said, by far, these are the best tours he's ever been on. And I've probably done 6 or 7 now. But they, you just go to London Walks, and you have to be careful because there's walks, there's all kinds of walking tours, but London Walks. And when you go to their website, it says, how do you take a walk? How much does a walk cost? And you're just meeting up at a tube station with a guide, and they take you on a 2-hour walk. And it's very specific. Like I did a walk of Piccadilly. I did a walk of Mayfair. I did a walk. Let's see. Actually, a guide took us out to Windsor Castle and Stonehenge. We did a walk through the Tower of London and Westminster. And one good thing is you bypass the queue to get in because they get in, So you get to just walk in and you spend 2 hours on this tour. And you're right. It's all very story based. So they really pull you in, and it's just fascinating. And then you can ask any question. These are blue badge guides. So they're like professionals. They're historians. They're museum curators. They're professors. And this is like the lady we just had in Oxford. She'd been doing this 20 years. So they can answer anything about British history that you throw at them. And it's always, I just like that it's story based. It's not like you're sitting in a history class with dates and, stuff like that. But that really does make a difference. I don't know, audio guides, sometimes I just won't push the button like, like when I get up there, it's like, I've heard too much, or it's just not sticking with me,
Yeah, I definitely think the live tours, when you can get them, are really beneficial.
And they did say that the group that I just took said that they felt like the 2 live tours that we did in Oxford, we had a guide. They didn't offer a tour for Oxford with London Walks, so they will do a private tour for you. You can just say, what do you want to see? And we'll try to arrange a guide. So they found a guide that lived in Oxford, and she spent the whole day with us, ate lunch with us, so we kept talking through lunch. And it was just, they said that really made all the difference.
Mm-hmm.
for them.
That's wonderful. Well, one thing I noticed was that you can fill your days super easily, but I like to make the most of every minute. And so in the evening, after the places have closed to tour, what are some of the things you recommend doing?
Well, eating, of course.
Yeah.
That's one of my questions. Yeah, that's coming.
Yeah. Yeah, eating, of course. But let's see. One of my favorite things to do, and we did not get to do this time because we were all just too tired. Our first day, I walked 11 miles. David and I walked 11 miles.
Mm-hmm.
So, but there's a place called the Sky Garden, and there's a lot of observation decks in London where you can go to the top of a tall building and see all of London, or the London Eye. You probably heard of that, the giant Ferris wheel.
Mm-hmm.
And they do offer great views, but they cost a lot of money and take up a lot of time, and they're kind of in touristy areas. But the Sky Garden is this botanical garden, and it's multiple stories tall at the top of a building, and it's glass. It's just a big open glass room, and you can even go outside. And it's filled with plants. It's a garden, and it's free. So you can get tickets online, a few days before. But they were always at times I didn't want to go, like at noon.
Mm-hmm.
So the best time to go is kind of around sunset because you get to see day and night, the city lit up.
Mm-hmm.
And it's free. You just go to the entrance of the building and you wait in line. And as people come down, they let more people go up. And so, we didn't wait that long. I've done it 2 or 3 times and we've gotten in every time.
Mm-hmm.
I think they do have restaurants up there. So if you wanted a guaranteed spot, you could make a reservation. But we never really wanted to spend the money on food up there. We just wanted the view. And once you get up, you can stay as long as you want.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's the best thing to do at night.
Mm-hmm.
And just walking around, like we all walked to Buckingham Palace at 9:00 at night. And we were like the only ones there. It was just kind of fun to walk around because there certainly is still a lot going on after 5 or 6 o'clock at night.
We were told to see a show, and so we ended up seeing 2 shows because the first one we loved so much. We saw Les Mis, and that was, I think, in the oldest theater, and it's the longest continuous running show. And I mean, it was amazing. Like, it was, again, another activity that I thought before we booked it, I could probably take or leave it. No, I loved it so much that I wanted to see a different show. So, that's, I feel, really something that you can make an evening activity out of, and was really good. Another thing was I didn't really want to waste time doing this during the day, but we went to Harrods in the evening because just to see that department store is quite the experience, but I didn't want to take away from a daytime attraction to do that.
Yes. And I was going to mention the department stores. I do not want to go. In fact, I couldn't convince the group I was with to go to a department store. They're like, no, we don't want to shop. And I was like, no, this is not about shopping.
Yeah.
The buildings themselves are architectural masterpieces. Like you will want to go just to see the building. So I'd recommend Harrods and Fortnum and Mason and Liberty London. And Liberty London is my favorite. And it's this huge, it takes up several city blocks. It's a Tudor style building, the white stucco with the big timbers. And it was designed on the inside to look and feel like a home. Like it's got smaller individual rooms for the little shops, and they have fireplaces, and it's just cozy. All the timbers came from British battleships that they, out of commission, and they repurposed them. And even the floors in the store were deck floors from ships. And you can almost kind of go on a scavenger hunt in this place. They have hidden figures, animals carved into like the newel post on the staircase. And they supposedly have the portraits of all of Henry VIII's 6 wives throughout the store. And there's even memorials of staff who died in World War II. And then the copper roof is Mayflower, the ship that brought the Pilgrims to America. Like there's just a lot of history. And then it has the longest chandelier in Europe. So they tell you like go up to the 4th floor and you can look down and see the whole chandelier.
Wow.
We did go to Harrods for the first time this time. And you can have tea at all of the department stores. So
yeah, the food even in the department stores is amazing.
It is.
That brings up tea. So you have to do tea while you're in London. And I just have to say, I fell in love with clotted cream. It is so delicious. And You have to have it as many days as you possibly can.
Yeah, I wanted, instead of doing like a tea that cost 150 pounds, I decided I wanted tea every day. So we would just find, like a lot of the bookstores have tea. Department stores have tea. Like you can find it in a lot of places and you don't have to spend a lot of money. It's not like a huge meal, but
Mhm.
you can get like a scone or something small with a cup of tea. Like even at the museums, they have cafes that have tea.
Yeah. And we did the tea one day where you got the little sandwiches and stuff, but I actually preferred the other days where I just focused on what I liked the best, which was the scone and the clotted cream and the tea. I don't
Yeah.
need the sandwiches. All right. What about some of your other favorite places to eat? Because I know you and John have always been foodies, and wherever you go, you always have a lot of restaurant recommendations.
When we met up with our friends who had been on the mission trip in England, they said that the pastor at the church said that he was so tired of hearing people complain about the food in England.
Mm.
That nobody wants to come there because the food is so bad. But what is true about that is if you just eat English food, it is bad.
Mhm.
Or it gets old. Like if you ate in a pub every night, you're going to get tired of beef and fish and chips. I mean, it's the same everywhere,
Mhm.
but London is one of the most, internationally diverse cities in the world. So think about it. You've got the best of all of these, ethnic foods.
Mhm.
So my favorite is Indian, and we have a favorite restaurant called Dishoom, and we ate there the first night, and they loved it. And then the last day, we were there till 4 in the afternoon. Like our flight took off at 4, so David and I ate breakfast there. And I didn't even know you could eat breakfast at an Indian restaurant, but it was the best food I'd ever had. And so yeah, we like that. Now in London, I don't like to spend a lot of money. Like I try to find places where you can eat for like £20 a person
Mhm.
for dinner. And so I just like to look out for places that locals eat, not chains, not, well, we did eat at some chains, but they were London chains,
Mhm.
like a pizza place that had more than one location,
Mhm.
or a burger place. There's a place called Honest Burger that has a couple locations. So I don't know. That's the kind of places I like to eat. It's so expensive there.
Mhm.
I don't know. I just didn't want to spend, hundreds of dollars every night on food.
Mhm.
But it's worth it to eat at I would say it's worth it to eat at a pub one night to get that experience.
Sure.
Um, and we did that in Dover, and we thought in Dover, it's right by the sea. So it kind of focused on seafood. So that was a great place to get fish
Yeah.
and chip or yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, it was really good.
Now, where would you recommend that first time people stay?
Well, we've always stayed in Airbnbs in London. And this time we had to choose a hotel because we were going to need 3 rooms, and we were afraid that somebody might have to cancel last minute, and we didn't want that to affect everyone else's trip.
Mhm.
So we chose a hotel. And I think I talked to your mom and dad more than I've ever talked to them, Marie, trying to find a hotel. And just because it's so hard to trust reviews, and like I knew the area I wanted to stay, the part of town, but I just, it's just hard to know what a place is going to look like, because they mostly had good reviews, but then there would be those one or two reviews that just made it sound terrible, So I like to stay in central London, which is more expensive, but it's convenient.
Mhm.
You're right there, and you're not spending as much on transportation and time or money. And actually, I even had the tube station I wanted to stay next to. I wanted to stay next to the Gloucester Road tube station in Kensington, and our hotel ended up being about 5-minute walk from there. It was perfect.
Mm.
Had a good deal. Like our room was, they say in central London anywhere from 100 to 500 pounds a night. Our hotel ended up being about 180 pounds, which is about $225 a night, but super nice, like not luxurious, but just great service. They're all very tiny and small, and but it had a nice restaurant that served a continental breakfast, and just very good service, and great location. To me, that's the most important. I want it to be clean and nice, but to me, the most important thing is how far am I from a tube station?
Sure.
Mhm.
Yeah, that makes a difference.
Yeah, and not a bus station, because that really
Mhm.
doesn't matter. Buses aren't going to help you out that much. You want to be near a tube station.
Mhm.
So yeah, I like the Kensington area, but
Mm-hmm.
So that's just a preference. And a safe area, and that's a very safe area.
Mm-hmm. So hotels, is something that you would recommend then. I always feel like if I'm going somewhere for the first time, if I try to pick an Airbnb, that feels very daunting to me because I don't know the area well enough. But you have also stayed in Airbnbs, and have you had good luck with them?
Yeah, I've never had any problem with an Airbnb. In fact, I found the old Airbnb I stayed in last time. She still rents it. We walked right past it every day, and I thought
Mm-hmm.
it was just a one bedroom though. It wasn't going to work for us, but
Mm-hmm.
I find those to be homey, and you can eat breakfast. You could even pack a lunch if you wanted to, if you wanted to save a little money. Like at this hotel, our room did not come with breakfast because I had ordered on like booking.com or
Mm-hmm.
reserved, and the other two couples had booked directly with the hotel and they got breakfast.
Oh,
Well,
that's
the break
interesting.
and now their room rate was probably higher than mine, but the breakfast was 24 pounds a person. So that's like a $60 breakfast for the two of us. I couldn't justify that.
Sure.
So David and I just got up early, literally walked outside around the corner and went to this French bakery and got a pastry and coffee for £5 every morning.
Mm-hmm.
That was totally fine for
Mm-hmm.
me.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know.
What souvenirs should you buy? Now, I will just preface this with saying I had a hard time. I thought that I would find so many souvenirs, and it feels like souvenirs the world over, when you go in souvenir shops, are very chintzy and not anything that you really want to bring home. So, what do you recommend for things that you actually do want to put in your house?
Yeah, Mindy asked this question. I really appreciated it because I tend to stay away. Like, if you're in the kind of like, I don't know, there's some certain parts of towns I try to avoid that are really tourist traps that kind of look like a Times Square in London,
Mhm.
and they've got the hats and the pins and the little miniature Big Ben statues and the keychains and all of
Mm-hmm.
that. And I don't need any more of that, So on my trip, I went to this antique market. It's called the Portobello Road Market in Notting Hill. And every Saturday, it's the largest antiques market in the UK.
Mm.
And so I bought teacups and saucers there,
That's
like
really
not
cool.
not like a whole set, but like one or
Mhm.
two. They have old books and old record albums. So I got my boys some record albums, like a British artist.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
I bought my son. There are streets there that just have bookstores on them, and that's one of my favorite things to go to in a city is a bookstore. And I bought my son like first edition copies of Lord of the Rings. And this time I bought
Wow.
some Hobbit
Mm.
prints because Tolkien and Lewis both, lived and taught in Oxford. And so I bought those in Oxford. I bought a copy of the book, A Christmas Carol, at Dickens' house. I bought tea from tea shops. I got a scarf at a Christmas market. I bought some perfume there once. Like, I don't
Mm.
know, I just want to buy things that I really want and need, not just to say it came from London. You know what I mean? Like
Mhm.
I'm going to use
Right.
it at home. Yeah. This time I bought one book because that was all I could fit in my luggage.
Yeah. Yeah. That's great. I love that idea. Those sound like souvenirs that you'll actually use. Okay, so say you've planned your first trip and you've gone once. Now, what do you do? Because I've gone once and I've seen the highlights and like all the things. If you said, what are the top 10 things to do in London? But if I was going to go back, then where do I stay and where do I start to branch out? And that feels like a harder trip to plan.
Well, I would say when I returned for my second big trip, or which third, I guess, that's when I started to venture outside of London. We used London as a home base, and we took short train trips out and back most days. So I went with a friend whose daughter was studying in London, and she wanted to visit her, and so I went with her, and that was one of the most fun trips, just because we did whatever we wanted. There were just two of us,
Mhm.
so it was much easier to plan than a trip for seven. Where you have to consider everybody. We were just like, "What do you want to do today?" And so we took a day trip to Bath. We took a day trip to Dover. We went to Oxford. there's a trip you can go to Cambridge. You could go to Canterbury. They're all just probably an hour's train ride out in all directions.
Mm-hmm.
And the trains are so easy to use and easy to figure out. You don't have to buy your tickets in advance. Now, one thing I did notice, though, from 2019 is they have gone up in price quite a bit. The travel is expensive. But yeah, I would say maybe venturing outside of London, even if you didn't do that every day, maybe pick a day or two.
Mm-hmm.
And then we just found places that were not as well known, things to see. Like we went to Hampton Court Palace, which was the home of Henry VIII, which I love Tudor history.
Mm-hmm.
So we went to that one day and we took a train, but I think you can take a boat on the Thames to get there, which is really cool.
Mm-hmm.
And so that took up a whole day. We discovered an area in London called Little Venice. And it's this kind of affluent residential area where all these canals come together. And there's these beautiful, like Regency period white houses lining the canals. And you see these beautiful long boats on the canals. They've turned them into houseboats, Airbnbs, and even some cafes and coffee shops. And the canals are on like a lock system. They had these they call them long boats. They're just low, long boats. And those were used to like bring coal into London.
Mm-hmm.
And so now they've just repurposed those canals to make them, like recreational.
Yeah.
And people live on their boats there. So that was a fun day. I think of London as it's like if you've been to New York City, that just feels like a city. And there are parts of London that feel like Manhattan, but it's also just like a lot of really cool neighborhoods joined together. And each one changes like the character and the architecture. So we discovered Notting Hill, which is a real eclectic area that has like beautiful architecture. They have pastel colored houses. And it's known for the Portobello Road Market, which is on Saturdays. It's that antique market I was telling you about. And there's just lots of vintage shops and great food and cafes there. And then you mentioned the theater, and they were saying that it is a little less expensive than Broadway. So it is a good thing to do while you're in London. And I wanted to see Hamilton there, and we were just too tired at night to stay out till that late. Mm-hmm. But we did see Mousetrap, which it was my understanding that Mousetrap was the longest running play of any kind, and it's in its 72nd year. And it's just kind of a piece of theatrical history. It's written by Agatha Christie, she's British, and there's a memorial near the theater to her. And that was fun. It was historical. Like they have a big plaque in the theater of like how many performances they've run and how many years. And it's in a beautiful theater. But I didn't want to see it again. So we didn't do that again. But yeah, they say that the theater is a little cheaper, and that is a good thing to do at night.
Mm-hmm. Now, I know that did you do the Cotswolds? And I don't really know where that is in relation to London, but I feel like if you've watched any Masterpiece theaters or anything like that, you're like, oh, I want to see the Cotswolds, but I don't exactly know what they are. They just sound great.
Yeah, it's just a area that's northwest, kind of near Oxford. Like if you went to Oxford, I think you're in the Cotswolds or in Bath. You're kind of already at the edge. Okay. But it's just these little villages, and they're linked by pathways. So you could walk from village to village, and they're I think they're called wool towns. Like they were originally these villages, and they raised sheep, and that was their main source of income. So we went to one called Chipping Campden, and it still had the wool market. Like it was the oldest thing in the town. It was a little pavilion where they would bring the sheep wool in. And apparently that was like, I don't know, I'm rusty on this history, but that was kind of equivalent to like gold back then, sheep wool. Like that was a huge moneymaker. So these were all these sheep wool towns, and it's just gorgeous. Like they have very strict building codes. Like everything has to be made of Cotswold limestone, and it's kind of got a yellow honey color. So all the buildings kind of look alike, and yeah.
I picture eye candy everywhere.
Yeah. Yeah. It's gorgeous. Yeah.
All right, Julie, this is all fascinating. And I am new to all of this. Like I have never been to London. So I truly enjoy hearing all of your takeaways and everything. So if we could get back to even just the basics of planning the trip, I'm thinking clothes, weather, the travel, like how do you pack for London? What are some things that you would recommend?
Well, one thing I learned the hard way was not to overpack. Now, which is always my tendency in the car. I feel like I fill the whole car up because you can, and it kind of depends. Like this time on this trip, we stayed in the same hotel every night except for one. So if you're not moving around, I feel like you could bring a little more,
Mm-hmm.
But like if you're changing hotels and taking train trips where you're going to need to pack your luggage, you're going to regret having to pull around more than one bag,
Yeah.
Because there's cobblestone streets, there's staircases down into the tube, and the train stations all have stairs, and you have to find the elevator. Like you don't want to be lugging around a lot of extra stuff. So I would say a carry-on, which is nice. And then what to pack? I would say the most important thing is a jacket, because even in the summer, unless there's this big heat wave, you're probably going to need a jacket at some point, like in the evening, if it rained, a rain jacket, something waterproof, because the temperature does change a lot from day to evening. In the winter, I would say like a down jacket, something waterproof. You would want a scarf, hat, and gloves. I even took that on this trip in October. At some point, I needed a hat and gloves. Now, other people didn't, but I did. And then I would say water-resistant shoes. I had leather ankle boots, but I had treated them before I left. And then some durable tennis shoes. And again, you could spray those to keep them waterproof. And everybody talks about London having being so rainy, and they say on the London Walks website that actually they get less rainfall than I think Rome. That people don't. I guess that the actual accumulation is not much, but it does rain often, or it's gray and drizzly, damp a lot. But it's not like heavy downpours necessarily that you need umbrellas and So, but I did pack a little mini umbrella that I kept in my crossbody bag just in case, because we did have one day of rain, like rain.
Okay.
But I would say layers, because even in the winter, then you go down in the subway, you get really hot and you have to take it all off and then put it back on. I know when I traveled there in the summer, I brought dresses because I had read somewhere that it's easier to pack. You're only packing one item for the day, not a top and a bottom,
Okay.
So that helped, lessen your load. And I think as far as traveling to big cities in America, you see people dress one way. Londoners don't wear sweatpants in public. They don't really wear T-shirts with writing on them. Like you'll never see like their team names and funny things like that. You just don't see that. So I think you would actually dress up a little more. And I'm not even talking about jeans are fine, but maybe ankle boots and a blazer or you know what I mean? Like they just don't wear like sports kind of clothes around unless they're actually going to a gym,
Okay.
But yeah, crossbody bag. I kept my scarf, an umbrella, snacks, my wallet, my phone, some hand sanitizer, kept that with me. I don't think it's anything to stress over, but just pack. I would just say pack minimal, because most of the time I had a jacket on. I could have worn the exact same thing every day and nobody would have noticed.
Right.
When I went, it rained every day except one. So almost every picture I have a green raincoat on because and it wouldn't like downpour, but there was just rain. And when you're setting out for the day, you don't want to carry your jacket. So you try to wear something lighter underneath and then wear your jacket because you're going to need it.
Right.
That's true. Like if we didn't ever come back to the hotel midday, so you kind of had to have everything with you, through all the weather changes for the day.
Yeah.
Now, I know you have in the past, but on most of your trips, would you say there's a need to rent a car?
In London, absolutely do not You do not need a car. No, in fact, they even like have taxes on which zone you drive in. Like zone 1, there's a higher tax, because they don't want people driving there.
Okay.
So, and the tube stations are just, I mean, to be the subway there, the tube is the easiest of anywhere I've ever been to navigate. Like, to me, way easier than New York or Boston. I don't know why. It just seems easier. And it just runs really smoothly, and it's fun to use, and you can go all over the city, and it's pretty cheap. It doesn't cost a lot. And now, like, you used to have what they called an Oyster card that you tapped. You loaded money on it and tapped it. And now you just tap your credit card. Everything over there is just tap and go.
Really?
I did not like that because I didn't want to pull my credit card out of my wallet that often. And then if it's tappable, it's like, who's going to steal my stuff? Like, I just didn't feel good about that. So I did the Oyster card because I already had one. And I thought, if that gets lost, that's not that big a deal. But I didn't want to lose a credit card, because you're taking it in and out all day long. So you can still do either one. But so now when we went to the Cotswolds, we did drive. They have buses that run through there. I've never been able to figure out a bus system in another city. We wanted to go to Cornwall, and I've heard you really need a car to go there. And so I haven't really figured out, the further we get out into the country, how I'm going to make that work. Because John drove twice on 2 different trips, and it was white knuckle trips.
Oh my.
I mean, the roads are only the width of one car. And they're blind roads because they have hedgerows. So you turn a corner and there's a car coming at you. And one of you has to back up. I mean, this is kind of this is not a first world level road system,
Okay.
So that's a little weird. And I was just...
Do they have Uber drivers over there? Can you hire a driver or something like that?
Yeah. And the first time we went to Stonehenge, we had a London Walks driver take us out there. Yeah.
Okay.
Because we left from London. So we had, she drove through London but I don't know. I don't know how I'm going to work that out.
What I'm hearing you say, though, is try to use public transportation at all costs.
Because
do not rent a car.
Janet my friend Janet and her husband that had been on the mission trip, they had come into London for a day, and the pastor had sent them in a taxi. And she said, "Oh, I'm so tired of this taxi system." Because think about it, you're sitting in traffic. You're sitting in London traffic.
Yeah,
you don't get anywhere. Just because you're not driving doesn't mean it's faster. She said it took them, they would wait forever on the taxi. It was very expensive, $50 a ride or whatever.
Wow.
And you get nowhere. Even those big red London buses, the hop on, hop off, you're still sitting in traffic.
Oh,
so underground, you don't have any of that. You just get there super quick.
Yeah.
Yeah. One thing that I did want to talk about that I haven't talked about yet is I highly, highly recommend that you follow an Instagram account, and it's called Love and London. And it's a travel business that it's owned by this young American woman who moved to London, I think 11 years ago. And she has the most resources I've ever seen on London. She covers everything. So Mindy, if you're ever thinking about going, she will answer any question you have. And she sells itineraries anywhere from 3 to 6 days, and she kind of customizes them. Not you can customize them yourself. She gives you so many options. Here, if you're interested in food, you'll want to focus on this. If you're interested in nightclubs and and this or history or music, she has it kind of highlighted, you're going to want to go here. And she has walking routes, so you get a clear plan of this is the route I'm going to walk and take. And their tagline is visit London like you live here. So she's not going to let you eat at a place in Leicester Square, she said, that place drives me crazy. They have an M&M store. She goes, M&Ms aren't even British. Why do we have that? And a Lego store and, all that kind of stuff. And they have Madame Tussauds Wax Museum. She goes, why would you come to London and go to the
Sure.
wax museum, So she tries to keep you from, falling into those tourist traps. And you can go to her website, or she has lots of videos on YouTube. I think start at her website. That's probably the best thing. And she covers everything, like even transportation, like how do I get from the airport to London? Because the airport's pretty far outside of London. And she'll cover like convenience, speed, cost. She doesn't just give you what she thinks is best, but like if you're looking for the cheapest, then this is the way. If you're looking for the fastest, this is the way.
Okay.
She helps you learn to ride the tube and how to pay for it. She talks about where to stay and what you're going to pay. And she even shows you hotel rooms, like what they look like and what they're rated. I mean, she's just really a great resource. And I've never bought any of her itineraries or anything, but I've just seen enough of her videos throughout the years to pick up on her stuff. So yeah, she's great.
Wow, Julie, I feel like you could create your own business doing the same thing.
I know. I thought this would be so fun to do, because that's what I wanted to do, was to host trips. But she always advertises like that she is a Londoner, like that gives her a lot of credibility.
Okay.
Because she knows like what's happening, what's opening, what's there. Whereas, I wouldn't know all that. But this was a good trip, because when I hadn't been since 2018, and I thought, who knows if any of the places I like even survived COVID, like food wise and stuff. And it all had. So it all kind of came back and seemed really familiar. So yeah. I did have a couple other things I wanted to talk about on kind of that next layer of trip. Some other things that John and I enjoyed doing that you wouldn't want to do on your first and only trip to London necessarily, or drag your kids along to these things. But like, we love great bookstores. And so we just looked up, like what bookstores do you want to visit in London? And one of them is called Hatchard's, and it's the oldest bookstore in London. And it was built in 1797. And it's just very iconic. And something I learned on a London walk was there's these beautiful like crest that you'll see on the top of a building. It has like a crown. I mean, it's like a bronze plaque that's painted with like a royal blue, and those are called a royal warrant. And that means that they sell to the royal households. Like there was a chocolate store and it had that big royal warrant, meaning that the Queen, because when I was there, it was Queen Elizabeth, that's where she bought her chocolate.
Interesting.
And then there was a perfume store called Fleury, and that was where the Queen bought her perfume.
Wow.
So Hatchard's has 3 royal warrants, and I think that means like from past royal families, like dating way back. And a lot of authors will come there to sign their new books. And I had a fun story. The last time I was there, I was in line buying a book, and J.K. Rowling was checking out right in front of me.
Cool.
Now, I did not recognize her, but I overheard the staff talking. They were so excited, but they said they can't actually say anything when she's in the store because, that would upset her.
Yeah, that's really cool, Julie.
So once she was gone, I was like, dang, I wish I had paid more attention.
Wow.
And then there's another one called Daunt Books. And you see this a lot on Instagram. Like, it's funny, like things that get photographed on Instagram that you want to go see, but it's just a beautiful, like this old Edwardian building, and it's in a part of town called Marylebone. And then this time we found there's a street that's pretty much just bookstores, and one of them is called Through the Looking Glass, and they specialize in just all Lewis Carroll books because he's British. And then there's one called Marchpane. I don't know if I'm saying that right, but it is a rare children's bookstore, and they have a lot of first editions and signed copies. And I mean, these stores are just the size of maybe like your closet, literally, not very big, and just old books. And so I just talked with the shop owner, and I was saying like, what's your rarest book? And he said he had one, I don't even remember what it was, but it was like $15,000, the book.
Wow.
What?
Yeah.
Oh, that is not a souvenir I would be bringing.
No, these aren't books like you go to buy at these like really old stores, but they're just fun to look at. Like, wow, you have a original book by Lewis Carroll and signed by him, and And then another area, like John loved clothing. So have you ever heard of Savile Row? Like you hear it in songs and in movies and in books. Do you know what Savile Row is?
I'm thinking it must be fashionable.
Yeah, it's in Mayfair, and it's known for its traditional bespoke tailoring for men. So like it was where you would get your suit custom cut and made. And it's just store after store after store after store of this custom tailoring. Like you don't go in and shop, they just make you a suit, and for thousands and thousands of dollars.
Oh, yes.
So we weren't buying, but I don't know, it's just kind of fun to see that there are still places like that,
Sure.
and I think it dated back to the 1700s, and I think the Beatles had an office on that street, Savile Row, and so just neat. So that's not something you'd want to spend like going down Savile Row and old bookstores in lieu of Westminster Abbey or the Tower of London.
Right.
But once you've seen those things, that's the kind of stuff we liked, is just going through Covent Garden and finding old neighborhoods and neat stores. And there's just so much of that. You could probably never see it all,
Yeah. That's one thing I was so amazed by. Like, if you go to Boston, you think, oh, wow, so historical. We are so young. We are so young. And you don't realize that until you go someplace that is really old.
Yeah, when we were in Oxford, she would say, "Now this building, dates back to the 1300s." And there was one building I remember asking her because it was particularly beautiful, and she went, that's 1800s." And it was like she wouldn't even talk about it. Like that wasn't old enough to even justify any awe.
Yeah. Yeah, it's amazing. And I never realized how many wars there were in the world until you go through all the old castles, and they talk about, this guy reigned for 15 years because then there was a war and someone kicked him out, and then the new one. Like, I never realized there were so many wars because we only think in terms of wars that we've been in usually. But there's been wars and tons of them all throughout the ages.
Well, and Britain has the Imperial War Museum, so there's a whole museum just for that.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, it really is a very humbling place. I think it makes you feel like you're just a very small part of history because they have stuff from so long ago.
Well, and just neat to think about how that fit into how their history came before ours,
Right.
and what we copied and what we said we're going to do different, and really interesting.
Yeah,
really
very interesting. Well, this talk was very interesting, Julie. Thank you for sharing. I know that we get emails from listeners saying, could Julie give me tips on when I'm going to London next summer, and would Julie be able to do this? And I think this is a really great resource for people to go back and listen to. You don't know when you might plan a trip like this. And I think there's great information in here and places that you can even write down later, whether you're on your first trip or your second or your fifth, like Julie.
Yeah. I wanted to say, Mindy, you had mentioned the book, The Rose Code, as one of your I'm a fans a while back. And I did read that book. And this is something else I like to say, is that if you can, before you're going to go to a place, no matter what city, find some historical fiction. I mean, you could read nonfiction, but if you, even historical fiction, like reading that book made my visit. We went to Bletchley Park on this last trip, which is a little outside of London, and it's where the code breakers work to break the German Enigma. And just having read that book made my trip there so much more meaningful, because I think I sent you, Mindy, a picture of Dilly Knox's office. Yes. And if I had not read that book, I was like, who's Dilly Knox? I probably wouldn't have even looked twice at the house,
Right.
And I just thought, okay, Mindy's the only person in the world that I can send this to.
Oh my gosh, I loved that you did. And do you know, I recently mentioned that I loved World War II historical fiction. I mean, I had been reading it for probably 6 months, and I've not been to London. I definitely have read all the books. Like, it's time to go.
Yeah. Yeah, you really get an appreciation too. Like when we went to the Churchill War Museums, you really get an appreciation for what London went through. I mean, they were bombed and bombed and bombed. and the sacrifice that they made. And it's amazing to see things like that in person, because we think about our part, but our part came later. Like, they had a lot more sacrifice than we did.
Well, and it's never been on our own soil. Like, I can't imagine, like, I mean, that was the kind of the basis for the Narnia stories. Like, they shipped their children off with strangers to live in the country to get them out of London. I can't imagine doing that today, you know. Yeah, I mean, Westminster Abbey was bombed. Like, lots of places were damaged. And I just can't imagine. We talked about that several times. Like, can you imagine hearing the sirens right now while we were in London, knowing you had to get into a shelter underground, and scary.
Yeah. Well, lots of great information here, Julie. Thank you so much for sharing. Listeners, if you'd like to contact Julie at some point and have any input or tell her about your experiences or ask her specific questions, you can find us on Instagram at Midlife Matters Podcast, or you can email us at midlifematterspodcast@gmail.com. But Julie, I hope this will be a resource for listeners in the future, and that even if it's 3 years from now and you plan a trip, you can say, oh, remember that Midlife Matters episode? I'm going to listen.
That's right.
Because I've had 3 or 4 people message me about this. So hopefully this will help.
Yes. And Julie, we need to do your other travel itineraries. I mean, you've been to so many countries, so many places, and she's always the first person I call, because when I see that she's had a great time somewhere, then I'm pretty much like, oh, I'm on a book a trip too.
Right.
Well, Julie, Mindy, I enjoyed talking with you about this, and we'll talk with you next week.
Okay. Sounds great. Bye.
Okay, bye. We're so happy you joined us today. You can find the show notes for this episode at midlifematterspodcast.com. Also, please tell a friend about the show and help them hit the free subscribe button on their favorite podcast app. Be sure to follow us on Instagram at Midlife Matters Podcast. That's where we post pictures and stories about all the things we talk about in each episode. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next week.